The trip started like a normal adventure. Brian and Stewie decided to travel without any real plan, just to get away from home, see something new, change the scenery. The car drove farther and farther from the city. The signal disappeared. The road became narrow and the forest on both sides grew thicker. Stewie noticed it first. Brian became quiet. Too quiet. He barely answered, stared at the road, and sometimes licked his lips, as if he smelled something strange. When they stopped to rest, Brian walked into the forest and came back holding a piece of meat. He said he found it near the road. The meat looked wrong, too fresh. Stewie said it was a bad idea, but Brian was already eating. Slowly, carefully. His eyes didn't blink. After that, something changed. Brian became irritated. He stopped often, listened to the forest, said he heard footsteps. Stewie tried to joke, said they should go home. But Brian ignored him. He started looking at Stewie differently, not like a friend, but like something in the way. That night they stopped on the roadside. The forest was too quiet. No insects, no wind. Stewie woke up with the feeling that someone was watching him. Brian was sitting still, his head turned towards Stewie. His stare was empty and cold. Stewie quietly asked if everything was okay. Brian didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice sounded different, lower, distant. He said he felt better than ever, that he finally understood what he was meant to be. In the morning, Brian insisted they continue on foot. He left the car behind. Stewie panicked. He said they needed to turn back, that something was wrong. Brian stopped and slowly turned to him. He looked at Stewie in a way that made him fall silent. There was no anger in that look. There was nothing human. What happened next, no one knows. A few days later, Brian returned home alone, dirty, thin, with scratches on his paws. He didn't explain where Stewie was. He just sat on the couch and stared at nothing. When people asked, he said they traveled, that everything was fine, that Stewie stayed there. Sometimes at night, Brian goes outside and looks toward the trees. Sometimes he's found in the kitchen, eating something in the dark. Stewie was never found, and Brian never travels again. On the evening of December 31st, the Griffin house was filled with warm light from the Christmas decorations. Peter was laughing loudly at the TV, Lois was setting the table, Stewie was busy with one of his toys, and Brian was sitting on the couch, staring out the window. Snow was falling slowly, and something about it felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Brian didn't want to stay home. He said he was going out for a walk and would celebrate the new year somewhere else. No one really paid attention. The door closed and the sound of his footsteps disappeared into the night. Outside, the streets were almost empty. Streetlights glowed weakly, and Christmas lights flickered with a slight delay, as if time itself was off. Brian walked farther and farther from familiar houses. He didn't notice when he turned the wrong way. The neighborhood looked like Quahog, but not quite, like a faded copy. Identical houses, dark windows, no cars, no people. His phone showed 11:58 p.m. The time didn't change. Brian noticed one house decorated for the holidays, but too perfectly. The Christmas tree in the window stood unnaturally straight. The lights didn't blink, they just glowed with a cold, steady color. The front door was slightly open. Brian hesitated, then stepped inside. The house was silent. No music, no ticking clocks, just the feeling that something was watching him. In the mirror, Brian saw himself and quickly looked away because the reflection kept staring. When he tried to leave, the door was still there, but the handle wouldn't move. The lights went out. Then he heard something. Not a voice, but an echo of his own thoughts. What happened that night was never fully known. In the morning, Lois noticed Brian sitting in the living room. He was in his usual spot, but something felt wrong. He wasn't watching TV. He wasn't moving. He was just staring at the Christmas tree. His eyes were different, Not angry, empty. When Lois spoke to him, he slowly turned his head. His voice sounded normal, but the words felt strange, like he was repeating sentences without understanding them. As the hours passed, Brian seemed less and less like himself. He knew where things were, but didn't know why. He said everyone's names correctly, but looked at them like strangers. Sometimes he froze and stared into a corner of the room where nothing was there. At midnight, the new year arrived. At that exact moment, Brian stood up and smiled. Too late, too slowly. The lights in the house flickered and went out forever. The next day, the house was empty. The Christmas tree was still glowing. On the couch sat Brian, or something that looked like him. It was waiting.
It started small, so small that Lois didn't think twice about it. One morning, Stewie sat at the table, unusually quiet, staring at nothing with a strange, fixed expression. He didn't complain, didn't insult Brian, didn't threaten to build a weapon. He just sat there with his hands folded perfectly still. Lois joked, "Wow, Stewie, you're being so well-behaved today." He slowly turned his head toward her, too slowly, and said, "I'm learning." Brian was the first to notice that Stewie's pupils had changed. They looked narrower, sharper. When Brian asked him about it, Stewie smiled, a small, unsettling smile, and replied, "Evolution requires adjustment." But his voice sounded doubled, like another faint whisper was speaking along with him. A day later, Stewie stopped blinking. Entire conversations went by, and his eyes stayed open. Chris mentioned hearing Stewie walk around the house at night, but said the footsteps didn't sound like his. Too heavy, too long between steps. Meg said she saw Stewie standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., facing the wall, whispering something that sounded like numbers. Lois tried to comfort herself, telling Peter that Stewie was just going through a phase. But one evening, she saw Stewie's silhouette stretch across the wall in a way no light could naturally create, bending, elongating, twisting as if something inside him was rearranging. The next morning, Stewie didn't eat. He just sat at the table staring at each family member in perfect silence. When Brian asked him what he was looking at, Stewie answered, "I'm learning how to replace unnecessary things." By the third day, his skin tone looked a shade too pale. His head shape seemed almost wrong, slightly uneven, as if it was becoming something that didn't belong in a cartoon baby's body. He stopped using his usual vocabulary. Instead of his sarcastic wit, he spoke in short, flat phrases. "The house is changing. You don't see yourselves clearly. You'll understand soon." That night, Lois awoke to the sound of dragging across the hallway floor, like slow, rhythmic, like something being pulled. When she opened the door, the hall was empty, but the floorboards were scratched in long, straight lines leading to Stewie's room. She opened his door. The crib was empty. The window reflected nothing back at her, just blackness, as though the world outside had vanished. The next morning, Stewie reappeared at the table as if nothing happened, but he was taller, his limbs slightly too long, his onesie stretched tight around joints that weren't shaped the same way anymore. "Stewie, honey, are you okay?" Lois asked. He looked at her with that same empty stare and whispered, "Almost." That evening, Peter went down to the basement to look for him and never came back. Lois assumed he'd fallen asleep down there, but Brian felt something wrong in the air. He refused to go down the stairs. By the fourth night, only Lois dared to search. She went into the basement, calling Peter's name. No answer. The lights flickered as she descended. At the bottom, she saw something in the corner. Small at first, sitting with its back turned. "Stewie?" she whispered. The figure turned toward her. It was Stewie's face, but stretched, warped. The features too wide apart, the smile too thin, the eyes too deep, not blinking, not breathing in any recognizable rhythm. "Mother," it said, but the voice wasn't Stewie's. It was layered, distorted, echoing around the basement. "I finished learning." Lois stumbled back, shaking her head, whispering, "You're not my baby, you're not him." The creature took a single step and the lights above them dimmed almost to black. "I am what he became," it said. "And now, you will stay with me." The basement door slammed shut behind her. The lock clicked. The light died. When the camera cuts, the final scene shows the Griffin living room. Meg, Chris, and Brian sit quietly on the couch, staring blankly forward. In Stewie's little red chair sits the new Stewie, perfectly calm, perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, watching the family like an observer. He tilts his head just slightly. The screen cuts to black.
The episode begins with something completely ordinary. Peter and Brian are walking down the street, joking around, enjoying an evening stroll. Peter tells a dumb joke. Brian gives his usual sarcastic chuckle. Everything feels normal, until a stray dog, dirty, wild-looking, fur bristling, suddenly runs out from behind a parked car. It lunges at Brian, bites him, and bolts into the distance before Peter even realizes what happened. "Whoa! Brian, are you okay?" Peter shouts. Brian looks at him, and in that moment Peter freezes. Brian's pupils suddenly dilate, massively, unnaturally, spreading like black ink across his eyes. For a second, his expression goes blank, empty, like he doesn't recognize the world around him. "I'm fine," Brian says, too calmly, too emotionlessly, like he's repeating someone else's words. Peter doesn't believe him. The next day, Brian looks worse, much worse. His pupils stay huge even in bright light. The fur around his neck stands up as if permanently electrified. His canines are longer, sharper, visible even when his mouth is closed. He barely speaks, and when he does, it sounds like two voices are overlapping. That evening, he paces the house in long, quiet steps that leave no sound behind. Peter catches glimpses of his shadow bending strangely on the walls, lagging a half-second behind his movements. Stewie eventually says, "Peter, I'm taking him outside. I think something's wrong with him." And Stewie leaves with Brian. Hours pass, then Brian returns. Alone, Peter rushes to him. "Brian, where's Stewie? Where is he?" Brian looks up slowly and smiles, a huge, unnatural smile stretching too far across his muzzle. Then he starts laughing. Not a normal laugh, a broken, echoing, strangled laugh. Stewie never comes back. Terrified, Peter and Lois drive Brian to an animal shelter, hoping vets will help him. Medicine, testing, anything. The staff say they'll keep him under supervision. They promise everything is under control. Days pass. The house grows quiet, too quiet. One evening, Peter comes home earlier than usual. He opens the front door and instantly feels something wrong. The air inside is cold, heavy, unmoving. Lois? Chris? Meg? No voices, no footsteps, no sounds. He steps deeper into the house, and then he sees it. Brian is standing in the middle of the living room, but it isn't Brian anymore. Before Peter stands a massive creature, towering, monstrous. His neck fur has grown into a full bristling mane. His fangs are enormous, jutting out even when his mouth is closed. His limbs are thick, powerful, and his chest rises with slow, thunderous breaths. His eyes glow faintly red. And most terrifying of all, he stands upright on two legs, like a person. Shadows tremble around him as if the room is too small to contain him. Peter steps back. The creature steps forward, and in a soft, eerily gentle voice it says, "I came back, Peter." The episode starts quietly. Late at night, Peter comes downstairs to get a glass of water. As he walks into the kitchen, he notices Brian sitting by the window in complete darkness, completely still, like a statue. Peter flips the light on, and Brian slowly turns his head with a slight delay, as if his muscles aren't responding right. Peter asks if everything's okay. Brian smiles a little too widely and says, "Yeah, just listening." "Listening to who?" Peter asks. "The house," Brian replies. The next morning, Brian acts normal, but something is undeniably off. He doesn't answer when spoken to, as if he's busy listening to something inside his own mind. He barely blinks, and when he does, it's slow and unnatural. The fur on his neck is permanently raised, as if sensing something invisible. Lois notices he's been walking around the house at night. Heavy, long footsteps that sound like a much bigger animal. One day, Meg tries to pet Brian, but he jerks back suddenly, and his pupils expand instantly, covering almost the entire eye. For a split second, he looks like he doesn't recognize her at all. Then, in a calm monotone, he says, "I shouldn't. I'm changing." That evening, Brian stops eating regular dog food. Instead, he sits by the refrigerator, listening to the hum of the motor like it's whispering something important. Peter jokes about it, but later that night he hears Brian scratching loudly across the floor, not with paws, but with something long and sharp, like claws. By the next morning, Brian is bigger, much bigger. His chest looks broader, his footsteps heavier. He moves like he's adjusting to new muscles he didn't have before. His eyes shine with a faint glassy glow. Lois suddenly realizes Stewie is missing. His room is empty. No crib, no toys, no trace of him. Only one broken toy on the floor. Panicking, Peter runs to Brian. "Did you see Stewie? Where is he?" Brian lifts his head slowly and a strange sound escapes him. Half laugh, half growl. "He took care of things," Brian says calmly. Peter tears through the house searching for Stewie, calling his name. Brian follows him everywhere, towering over him now, his head nearly brushing the door frames. His movements are slow, controlled, confident, like he already knows Peter won't find anything. At night, Peter checks the basement, hoping for any clue, but it's dark and too quiet. When he turns around, the door shuts by itself. Brian stands at the top of the stairs, massive, almost human tall. His shadow fills the entire doorway. His fur bristles like a mane, and his eyes glow faintly as he speaks. "The house told me," he says gently, "told me what I'm supposed to become." Peter steps back in terror as Brian begins descending the stairs one step at a time. Each one shakes the basement slightly. "You're not Brian," Peter whispers. Brian smiles, his mouth stretching too far. "I'm better." The light flickers, the sound cuts out, the screen goes black. A final post-credits shot appears. It's nighttime in the Griffin living room. An enormous creature, Brian's final form, sits calmly on the couch, breathing slowly. His silhouette is monstrous, but he sits like a person. The house is silent. There is no Peter, no Lois, no Stewie, only Brian, and the sound of his slow, heavy breathing.